can see classified either anatomically or etiologically. Anatomically, it could be either at the valvular level or at the subvalvular level, which could be either be a fixed obstruction in the form of a membrane or a muscular band, or it could be dynamic as seen in cases of HOCM. It could also be supravalvular, for example, coarctation of aorta and other diseases. Etiologically, it could be either congenital, whereas forms like unicuspid, bicuspid, and a membrane and all those things come under congenital etiology. It could be either rheumatic and degenerative in adults. So etiologically, age-wise, if a patient is less than 30 years, the most common will be bicuspid aortic valve. Whereas in patients who are 30 to 60 years of age, it is basically post-inflammatory, that is rheumatic heart disease, or it could be a progression of the congenital heart disease wherein there is calcification of the congenital leaf valve. In more than 70 years of age, it's usually degenerative. So here we can see how it looks anatomically, the degenerative calcific valve, wherein the most important thing is there is no chemical fusion. Basically, the leaflets are thickened and then they are restricted in mobility. Whereas in rheumatic aortic stenosis, basically the etiology, the pathophysiology revolves around the fusion of the commissures. And in bicuspid aortic valve, again, it is a progression of the disease. I would say more of a degenerative etiology in a patient who is having bicuspid aortic valve. To look at two broad categories, those patients who are less than 70 years, the majority of the etiology will be a congenital bicuspid aortic valve leaflet, and a few causes could be post-inflammatory or degenerative. Whereas in a patient who is more than 70-year-old, the majority of the causes is a degenerative valve disease. Coming to clinical features, the cardinal manifestations of an acquired aortic stenosis are existential dyspnea, angina, and syncope, and untimely heart failure. So though these are classical descriptions, we don't see these classical presentation in patients who come to our clinic. So the most common clinical presentation is a gradual decrease in the exercise tolerance. There is onset of fatigue, dyspnea, and exertion. So when you ask a patient, he'll tell, I don't have any symptoms. But then that is because they have gradually decreased their day-to-day activities, they decrease their exercise tolerance. So you need to very specifically ask this question to these patients. So when you physically examine, there are a lot of signs which we can look at. So, but then I want to highlight on this most important thing is the pulse. The pulse, it is very classically described as the pulses parvus and tardus. So here it is very, very important because it correlates with the severity of the disease. I'll come to that in the next slide. And then obviously we need to look at the ejection systolic murmur. So this is also very important. So how do you correlate these signs with the severity? So most of them correlate with the severity, but then I want to bring to this to you, all of you this point that the ejection systolic murmur, the intensity is not correlate with the severity. It is more with the timing of the murmur, which is important. So if it's late peaking, then it is more relevant to the severity of the disease. So the classical murmur, which is described as a harsh crescendo, decrescendo, late peaking systolic murmur, which is best heard at the aortic region with radiation to the carotid. So this is very, very important. And then the peaking is very, very important to tell the severity of the disease. Coming to investigations, we would start with an X-ray. The classical findings will be a left ventricular hypertrophy. There could be a left atrial enlargement, and we should always look at this post-stenotic dilatation of the ascending aorta. And then not to miss the ECG. So the classical description will be presence of left ventricular hypertrophy with strain pattern. There could be presence of left atrial enlargement, and the patient can have atrial fibrillation at presentation. So coming to the evaluation of aortic stenosis, what should be our aims? Our aim is to assess the severity of the lesion, to assess the LV function, to look at the presence of coexisting other valvular abnormalities, and then not to forget the evaluation of aorta. Then obviously our echo and the evaluation will seek answers to the questions like when the surgical intervention has to be done, the timing, the type of surgery, the results, and then the follow-up. And obviously, we need to look at the various complications when the patients present to us are either operated or not operated. And then obviously not to forget the coexistence of aortic regurgitation. So before we go to the echocardiographic evaluation, why is it important? Because aortic stenosis, the symptoms and the prognosis depends on the symptoms and the natural history of the disease. So here you can see when the patient develops angina in presence of severe aortic stenosis, the life expectancy is about 5 years. If they develop syncope, the expectancy comes down to less than around 2 to 3 years. And if the patient has already developed heart failure, the life expectancy in those patients is very, very like grave prognosis. So coming to the echocardiographic evaluation in aortic stenosis. So the goals of echocardiography in a patient with presenting with aortic stenosis will be to establish the diagnosis, to quantify the severity, to assess the LV function, to determine the valve area by continuity equation, to look at other associated diseases like the aortic dilatation, whether there is any coexisting mitral valve disease, and obviously we need to look at the presence of pulmonary artery hypertension, and then coexisting coronary artery disease, which will help us in planning the surgery and planning the management of these patients. So coming to the anatomy, aortic valve, how does the normal aortic valve look? So we are all very good at looking at the valves. So this is aortic valve, which is supposedly normal. So why do we tell it is normal? Because the leaflets are opening well, the leaflets are not thickened, and then the closure line is in the center. So if I still this image, so you can see the image, the valve is opening fully during systole, and then it's closing very nicely with folded hands. You know, the namaskara sign, which is very relevant in during this COVID-19 and then globally accepted as a way of greeting. So we should not forget this namaskara sign of a normal aortic valve. And in the short axis, definitely we need to identify the number of cusps which are there, and then again look at the opening of the valve leaflets, the thickening of the leaflets. So this is how the normal valve looks, and then we freeze the frame. You can see in systole that all the three leaflets are open, and you can see very nicely the leaflets are opening. And then this is not recommended to see the number of cusps, because if it is a bicuspid aortic valve and if it has a raphe, then it will look as though it is a tricuspid valve. So to look at the number of leaflets, you should always look at the systolic phase. So coming to the M mode. M mode is important because we need to look at the opening of the leaflets, because in 2D it is very difficult sometimes to look at the full opening of the leaflet. So M mode across the aortic valve, tips of the aortic valve leaflet, you can see this opening of the leaflet. So here very important thing is, one is we need to look at the center closure line as seen in during diastole in this clip. And then during the systole, we need to look at this very fine systolic fluttering of the leaflet. So this is very, very important to describe a normal aortic valve leaflet. And obviously we can do the measurements, the aortic root measurement, the aortic valve cut separation, and also the LA dimensions. So coming to bicuspid aortic valve, so what are the features of bicuspid aortic valve when we do a 2D imaging? So we definitely need to look at the thickening of the leaflets. So sometimes it may be thickened, may not be thickened, but then we need to look at the thickening of the leaflets. We need to look at the eccentric closure line. So this is very important. In this patient, you can see the closure line is eccentric. Then you should look at the systolic doming as well as the diastolic doming, or as it will look as though the aortic valve is prolapsing. And then not to miss the short axis of the aortic valve leaflet, we can very, very clearly demonstrate that it is a bicuspid aortic valve. So coming to the M mode is also very important. We can look at the thickening of the aortic valve leaflets, and then most importantly, we can look at the eccentric closure line in this patient. The eccentricity index, I'm not a great fan of this, but then just for the matter of knowing this, the degree of eccentricity can be calculated as half the distance of this internal aortic diameter at the onset of the diastole, and you divide that by the distance from the closure, the closest, the shortest distance between the closure line and then the nearest aortic valve. So an index of more than 1.5 indicates a bicuspid aortic valve. Though this is not very, very sensitive and I don't do it routinely. Coming to degenerative or rheumatic aortic valve, so very important view will be a Parsonal long axis view. Here, the M mode, it will, I will go to the 2D first. So there is increased thickening of the aortic valve leaflets. There is decreased excursion of the aortic valve leaflets. You can see very clearly in this patient. There could be a post-stenotic dilatation. So we need to sweep the probe and then look at the ascending aorta and then define if there is any post-stenotic dilatation of the ascending aorta. Always look for the presence of LVH in such patients, and then we can calculate the LV mass, and then also calculate the LV systolic function, very, very important, and not to forget to look at the LA enlargement. M mode wise, again, we can look at the increased thickness of the aortic valve leaflets, the aortic valve cusp separation. Here you can see as compared to the normal M mode, you can see that it is reduced, and then there is absence of the systolic fluttering of the aortic valve leaflets. There is restricted mobility, and you can always look at the LVH and the LA enlargement. So in Parsonal short axis, again, it's very, very important view to describe the anatomy of the leaflet pathology. So we can look at the number of cusps. So here you can see it is a tricuspid valve, and morphologically it is thickened. The mobility is restricted. There is calcific specs, and then always you have to look at presence of vegetation or any other mass on the valve, and then we can do a planimetry of the leaflets, provided the image is good. And coming to the 5-chamber view and the 3-chamber view, very, very important to look at these views to define the anatomy, again to cross-check what we have seen in the Parsonal long axis view. And then these views are useful for demonstration or recording the Doppler, be either the continuous wave Doppler across the aortic valve or the LVOT Doppler at the LVOT. And then we can always look at presence of coexisting aortic regurgitation and other pathologies like the mitral valve disease. So coming to the assessment of the aortic stenosis severity, there are three very, very important methods of assessing the severity of the aortic stenosis. The first one is the aortic stenosis jet velocity per se. Then we can calculate the mean transaortic gradient and then calculate the valve area by continuity equation. So coming to the aortic stenosis jet velocity, a smooth velocity curve with a dense outer edge and a clear maximum velocity should be recorded whenever possible, and we should always make an attempt to do that. Some patients, the views may not be good, or then you need to do other views and then see where in which view, whether it is in the 3-chamber view, the 5-chamber view, or the right Parsonal view, you need to take the maximum velocity. So depending on the velocity, the aortic stenosis is classified as mild when the velocity is 2.6 to 2.9 meters per second, moderate if it is between 3 to 4 meters per second, and severe if it is more than 4 meters per second. Not to forget, we need to keep in mind the patients who have HOCM, and depending on the Doppler, the dagger-shaped Doppler which we record. So what are the limitations of the aortic stenosis jet velocity? So here the parallel alignment of Doppler is very, very important to get the maximum velocity. And then not to forget, the velocities are flow dependent. Coming to the mean transthoracic pressure gradient, the transthoracic pressure gradient is calculated from the velocity using the Bernoulli equation, that is P is equal to 4V squared. So depending on what we get, so here what we do is we take a, suppose this 5-chamber view, we put a continuous wave Doppler across the aortic valve, and then you record this Doppler, then you trace this Doppler, and then we get a mean gradient. So if it is less than 20, it is mild AS. If it is between 20 to 40, it is moderate AS. And if it is more than 40 millimeters of mercury, it's classified as severe AS. So this, we need to be very, very important while doing these calculations, because there are sources of error for pressure gradient calculations. And the most important is malalignment of the jet and the ultrasound beam. So the Doppler principle is that you need to align the cursor or the ultrasound beam to the jet. Otherwise, we don't get the correct values. Then we need to be careful in presence of mitral regurgitation, especially the eccentric jets. and the medially directed jets. So we need to be careful because that can be recorded, and then we can falsely tell that this patient is having severe AS. And if there is a proximally elevated velocity, then neglecting that could cause this problem in calculating the continuity equation IIT valve area. Coming to the valve area calculation by continuity equation. So here the Doppler velocity and pressure gradients are flow dependent. We need to be very cautious about these things. And then the calculation of the stenotic orifice area is helpful when the flow rates are very low or very high. Okay. So how do you calculate? The simple continuity equation is flow across the aortic valve should be equal to the flow across the LVOT. So here we need to know the cross-sectional area of the LVOT, the VTI of the LVOT, and then the VTI of the aortic valve, and then we get the aortic valve area. So the continuity equation valve area calculation requires aortic stenosis jet velocity by continuous wave Doppler, the LVOT diameter for calculation of a circular cross-sectional area. Here, important thing is in the parasternal long axis view, you need to concentrate. You need to zoom on this LVOT region and then take a measurement. And be very careful while taking the measurement, because these are the sources of error in calculating the aortic valve area. And the third requirement is the LVOT velocity recorded in the 5-chamber view and the with the pulse wave Doppler. So what are the limitations of continuity equation valve area? Because the measurements are squared, so you need to be very careful. So there are measurement error in LVOT diameter, there could be measurement error in the LVOT velocity and the aortic velocity. So, and then the important thing is it measures the effective valve area, that is the area of the flow stream as it passes through the valve, and not the actual anatomic valve area. So there are alternative measures of stenosis severity. So there is a simplified continuity equation wherein we just look at the velocity and not at the VTI, velocity across the LVOT and the aortic valve, and calculate the cross-sectional area, and then we get the aortic valve area. There's one more index called as velocity ratio, wherein we take only the ratio of the velocity across the LVOT and the velocity across the aortic valve. And if it is less than 20.25 or 25%, then it is corresponds to severe stenosis. The most important method is the valve area by planimetry, but it is very difficult to do in some patients, especially if there is the window is poor and the calcification is more. But then you can always try, and then especially while doing transesophageal echo, aortic valve area by planimetry is very important. So how do you classify the aortic stenosis severity based on these three parameters? Is this is just a review of whatever I've told. So I'll just skip this for the interest of time. So this is there in the guidelines. We can go through it. And this is a summary of whatever I've told till now. So we can look at the aortic stenosis jet velocity, the mean gradient, continuity equation, and then the other things. So coming to the next step, once we know that this patient is having aortic stenosis, so how do you stepwisely approach to grading the severity of the aortic stenosis? So now these are the various possibilities. Suppose this patient is having severe AS. Now, how do you categorize these patients, especially depending on the flow and the ejection fraction, and then the flow, and then the gradient? So these three important things are there. So we need to know these important things when we are faced with a patient coming with severe AS. So this patient could have a EF of more than 50, or it could have a EF of less than 50. Plus his gradient could be either more than 40 or less than 40. Then we need to look at the stroke volume. So before we proceed further, we need to know how to calculate the stroke volume. This is especially important for sonographers who are doing regularly. And then we need to calculate the stroke volume before we proceed further. So how do you calculate stroke volume? Stroke volume is given by the equation LVOT area into the LVOT VTI. So how do you calculate? Suppose the heart rate is 100. So we calculate the stroke volume by into the LVOT diameter divided by 2 and square it, and then multiply by the LVOT VTI. So we get 60 ml. Then cardiac output will be heart rate into the stroke volume. So the normal stroke volume is 50 to 100 ml per beat, and when you index it, it is 25 to 45 ml per meter square. So on an average, we take it as 35 ml per meter square. This is a normal cutoff for a stroke volume. So, coming to the scenarios one after the other. So when we have a patient with a calcified leaflet, restricted motion, and a calculated aortic valve area of less than 1 centimeter squared, or indexed aortic valve area of less than 0.6 centimeter squared per meter squared. So this patient is having severe AS. So, and this if EF is more than 50 and the flow is normal and the gradient is more than 40, then this patient is having normal EF, normal flow, high gradient, severe AS. So this is if the flow is more, if the velocity is more than 5 meters or a mean gradient is more than 60, then this patient has to go directly for aortic valve replacement, even if he is asymptomatic. Coming to the next patient, so who is having a normal EF and a normal flow, but a low gradient. So this patient is having normal ejection fraction, normal flow, low gradient, severe ES. So why severe ES? Because the aortic valve area calculated by continuum equation is less than 1. So in this patients, you have to be very, very careful. You have to check, recheck the peak aortic valve velocity, use a PDOF to get the highest gradient, and look at other views wherever you are able to get a good Doppler and then the maximum velocity. Recheck the LVOT diameter and then recheck the LVOT pulse wave Doppler. So once you've done all these things, if all measurements are done correctly, then this may be truly a moderate aortic stenosis, as the mean pressure gradient of 40 typically occurs at aortic valve area of 0.75 centimeter square and not 1 centimeter square. And then 50% can still have truly severe aortic stenosis. And then in those patients, we have to do a CT calcium score of the aortic valve and to look at the severity of the calcified aortic stenosis. Coming to a third scenario. So this patient is having EF which is normal, but a low flow and a high gradient. So this patient is having these patients are typically obese with a body surface area of more than 2.1 meters squared or a BMI of more than 30. And the absolute stroke volume is usually more than 70. And when indexed, it becomes actually a low flow. So this means this condition is not actually low flow, but a normal flow, high gradient, severe AS. And these patients definitely benefit from aortic valve replacement. So you need to be careful while assessing these patients and look at the body surface area or probably index the aortic valve area to the body surface area. Coming to the fourth scenario. So when this patient is having EF is more than 50, but a low flow and a low gradient. So that is normal EF, but low flow, low gradient, severe AS. So here we have to look at the potential errors in the measurement of the gradient, the stroke volume, the aortic valve area, and then we need to exclude if there is a measurement problem. And to eliminate the confounding effect of the small body size, the calculation of the index aortic valve area here may be helpful, and a value of more than 0.6 centimeters square per meter square indicates a moderate AS and not a severe AS. So actually this condition is called as paradoxical low flow, low gradient aortic stenosis. So there is low flow, low gradient, but paradoxically the EF is normal. So the recent studies suggest that exercise or low dose dovitamin stress echo may be useful in these patients to corroborate the stenosis severity. So about 1/3 of these patients have pseudo-severe stenosis, and aortic valve calcium scoring by CT may be useful in to confirming the severity of the stenosis. So according to the guidelines, symptomatic patients in this category have a class 2A level of evidence C indication for aortic valve replacement. Coming to the next scenario. So the EF is less than 50. So it could be either be a normal flow or low flow, but then if the gradient is more than 40, then it is severe AS. So the high gradient means severe AS unless proven otherwise. So LV dysfunction makes these groups at high risk. So we need to be careful and evaluate these patients and plan their management. So the last scenario is low flow, low gradient AS. This is a classical low flow, low gradient AS. That is, the EF is less, the flow is less, and then the gradient is also less than 40. So in these patients, low dose dovitamin stress echo is useful to assess the stenosis severity and the LV functional reserve. So according to guidelines, symptomatic patients with classical low flow, low gradient aortic stenosis and evidence of severe AS on dovitamin stress echo have a class 2A level of evidency indication for aortic valve replacement. And patients with pseudo-severe stenosis have no indication for aortic valve replacement, but then require optimized heart failure therapy. So a slide on these patients, that is the classical low flow, low gradient aortic stenosis. So in these patients, we do the low dose dopamine stress echo. So how do you do the low dose dopamine stress echo? I'll just go to the next slide and come back to this slide. So starting dopamine at a dose of 2.5 to 5 micrograms per kg per minute, and then increase the dose to 2.5 to 5 micrograms per kg per minute every 3 to 5 minutes. The maximum dose to be achieved is 20 micrograms per kg per minute. We should not go above this. And the infusion is stopped when one of these parameters are reached. That is, a maximum dopamine dose is reached, or a positive result is obtained, or the heart rate rises 10 to 20 beats per minute over the baseline, or if it exceeds 100 beats per minute. And if the patient has developed symptoms, or there is a fall in the blood pressure, or any presence of arrhythmias, we need to stop the dopamine. So what is a positive result? An increase in the effective aortic valve area to a final valve area of more than 1 centimeter square. So this that stenosis is not severe. So this could be one of the results. Or the severe stenosis is suggested by an aortic stenosis jet velocity of more than 4 meters per second, or a mean gradient of more than 30 to 40 millimeters of mercury, provided that the valve area does not exceed 1 centimeter square at any flow rate. And if there is an absence of contractile reserve, that is the failure to increase the stroke volume by 20%, is a predictor of high surgical mortality and poor long-term outcome. Although valve replacement may improve the LV function and outcome even in this subgroup. So going back to this slide, so we have this low dose dopamine stress echo. So either the stroke volume increases by 20%, which indicates the LV flow reserve is present. So there are three scenarios in this. So if the mean gradient rises more than 40 with dopamine, then this patient is having true severe aortic stenosis and may benefit with the concerned treatment. If there is a flow reserve of more than 20%, but the mean gradient is less than 40 and the aortic valve area goes above 1 centimeter square, then this patient is having pseudo-severe AS or a moderate AS, and then this patient needs to be followed up. So the third category is the gradient is less than 40, but the valve area also becomes less than 1. So here we need to calculate the projected aortic valve area. So how do you calculate the projected aortic valve area? So we take the aortic valve area at rest, add the difference in the aortic valve area divided by the difference in the flow rate into 250 minus the flow rate at rest. This is very complicated. I would not like to confuse everyone. So we'll just ignore this for time being. So these are the examples, there are three examples of these patients with true severe aortic stenosis who is identified during the dopamine stress echo in patients who have a classical low flow, low gradient aortic stenosis. So during this test, the stroke volume increased by more than 20%, you can see here. And then the significant rise in the pressure gradient, that is more than 40. So from 29, it has gone to 52. And the aortic valve area remained less than 1 centimeter square. So this patient is definitely who has had a classical low flow, low gradient aortic stenosis is classified now as true severe aortic stenosis and will benefit from aortic valve replacement. The next patient, in this patient, the pseudo-severe aortic stenosis is identified during dopamine. So the stroke volume is increased, that is, the stroke volume is more than 20% here, and which indicates there is flow reserve, but there is no significant rise in the pressure gradient. So the mean gradient was 12 and then it becomes 13 and the aortic valve increased over 1 centimeter square. So there is this indicates that this patient is having pseudo-severe aortic stenosis. The third scenario is indeterminate. So the stroke volume did not increase, so it remained less than 20%. There is no significant change in the pressure gradient, and then the aortic valve area did not change very significantly. So these patients are indeterminate, and then we need to tackle them separately. So coming back to our the flow chart. So if the gradient is high, so more than 40, irrespective of the EF or the flow rate, these patients are classified as true severe AS. if the gradient is less. So it could be either be a moderate AS or a normal flow low gradient aortic stenosis. And if the gradient is low and the flow rate is low, irrespective of the EF, it could be either a paradoxical low flow low gradient aortic stenosis or a classical low flow low gradient aortic stenosis. So these are the ways in which we can classify the various patients. Either it could be a true severe AS, moderate AS, or a low flow low gradient aortic stenosis, either paradoxical or classical. So in paradoxical low flow, low gradient, what are the criteria that increase the likelihood of severe aortic stenosis in these patients who have less than 1 centimeter squared area of the aortic valve area and a mean gradient less than 40 in presence of a preserved ear? That is the paradoxical low flow, low gradient. Yes. So here we need to look at the clinical criteria, do the physical examination, and see if it is consistent with the aortic stenosis, then whether there is any typical symptoms without other explanation, and then the elderly patient more than 70 years. Qualitative imaging data, we need to look at LVH and look at if there is additional history of hypertension, and then reduced LV longitudinal function, that is the strain imaging we can do and see if there is the longitudinal strain is reduced. And quantitative imaging, that is the Doppler evaluation, where look at the mean gradient, calculate the aortic valve area and see if it is less than 0.8, and then calculate the stroke volume and then see if it is less than 35 ml per meter squared. And in these things, we need to look at the calcium scoring by multi-slice CT and then categorize according to the calcium score and see if this patient falls into severe AS. So this is in thorough evaluation of the aortic stenosis by echo. And then we need to classify the stages of the valvular AS. I don't want to go into the details. Then these are all given very clearly in the guidelines. And we need to concentrate on those patients with symptoms with severe AS. So these are classified as D1, D2, and D3. Again, I will skip for the want of time and discussion. So coming to the other concurrent conditions on assessment of the severity of the aortic stenosis. So if there is concurrent left ventricular systolic dysfunction, so what we have discussed in the previous slides, it could be either a low flow, low gradient aortic stenosis, and then we need to look at these three parameters and then further plan these patients' evaluation by dobutamine stress echo. So in presence of severe AS causing LV systolic dysfunction, we in these patients, the aortic valve replacement will relieve the afterload and may allow the LV ejection fraction to increase towards normal. So these patients, we need to again thoroughly evaluate and look for whether the aortic stenosis itself is causing LV systolic dysfunction, and we have to rule out coronary artery disease in such patients. And the third scenario is moderate aortic stenosis with another cause of LV dysfunction. So here the aortic valve replacement may not lead to a significant improvement in LV systolic function unless until the other cause of LV dysfunction is corrected. So in these patients, definitely dobutamine stress echo has to be done for evaluation of the severity in setting of the LV dysfunction. So other concurrent conditions, we need to look at LVH, whether per se the LVH is because of some myocardial disease or whether it is because of hypertension or whether per se it is because of the aortic stenosis itself. In hypertension, again, it will affect the flow and the gradients, but the aortic valve area measurement will not be affected in presence of hypertension. Another important entity is the presence of aortic regurgitation. Again, here the maximum velocity and the mean gradient will be higher than expected for a given valve area. So you need to see if there is any coexisting aortic regurgitation, and then that will have implications during our evaluation of the severity. Presence of moderate AS plus moderate AR, again, it is a severe combined valve disease, and then it needs appropriate treatment. Coming to mention the presence of mitral valve disease, if mitral regurgitation is present and if it is severe, then the transaortic flow rate may be low, resulting in low gradient even when severe AS is present. So you need to be careful in presence of severe MR. And again, high velocity MR jet may be mistaken for the aortic stenosis jet itself, and then you need to be very cautious when you are recording these velocities. And then high LV pressure due to aortic stenosis may cause the MR severity overestimation if only jet size is primarily used to evaluate the mitral regurgitation. So aortic stenosis can increase the severity of the mitral regurgitation indirectly, and you need to be careful while you're estimating the mitral regurgitation severity. In presence of mitral stenosis, it can lead to low cardiac output state and therefore a low flow, low gradient situation, and you need to be careful while evaluating such patients. Again, high cardiac output states like anemia or any other diseases, you need to be careful while evaluating the gradients. And not to forget ascending aorta while evaluating such patients because it has management, the treatment issues while doing the surgery, especially in patients who have bicuspid aortic valve and aortopathy. So last few slides, the role of TE. Again, it is very important to look at the morphology. It is very useful to calculate the aortic valve area by planimetry because of the good views we get and the proximity of the aortic valve to the probe. And measurements, definitely we can again look at the LVOT measurement, the annulus and the aorta evaluation, especially in pre-op patients. And there is no second thoughts of the role of TE in during intra-op, especially to see for mitral regurgitation and decide if the treatment modality or the management has to be changed, especially if the patient requires a mitral valve replacement also. And again, to look at the LV function intra-op and the post-op. 3D echo, not very great in aortic valve evaluation, but then there is better anatomic definition, especially if there's calcification is not there, and it helps in pre-op evaluation and planning of patient surgery. So indications of aortic valve replacement in patients with aortic stenosis, definitely we need to look at all these parameters, what is recommended in the guidelines. We look at the maximum velocity and the gradient, and if look at the symptoms. If the patient is symptomatic, it directly goes to aortic valve replacement, a class 1 indication. If the patient is asymptomatic, but then we need to look at the various parameters and see if the patient requires aortic valve replacement. And if the patient is having moderate AS but symptomatic and the EF is less, then we need to look at the low flow, low gradient situation and do dobutamine stress echo and see if the patient requires a aortic valve replacement. Therapy, aortic valve replacement is the modality of choice for severe aortic stenosis. We need to remember that the operative mortality in such patients is very high, 4 to 24%, and the morbidity rate is high. Event rate in asymptomatic severe AS is 1% per year. So we need to follow up these patients and see when they require surgery. Types of prosthetic heart valves, mechanical bypass, we cannot go into the details. These are the valves which are available. One slide on the choice of TAVR versus the surgical AVR. We need to look at the surgical risk of the patient. If the risk of surgery is less, then the patient goes for surgical aortic valve replacement. If the risk of surgery is high, then the patient is prefer to do a transcutaneous aortic valve replacement. These are the devices. I'll end with this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. That was indeed a very detailed and elaborate session. We've requested the participants to start posting their questions now.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, sir. It's a great presentations in the aortic stenosis varied presentations. Like these are the very, very usual challenges that we do see in echo labs in day to day, especially when the pseudo AS presents. Okay.
Yeah.
So I think this is a great insight of the guidelines as well as what is the what we need to do in day-to-day echoes. Thank you, sir. Thank you for the excellent presentation. Ranjit, are we moving to question and answer?
Sure, yeah. So can we start taking questions, sir?
Yeah.
Okay, the first question we have is, what is the effect of pressure recovery in AS gradient assessment?
Yeah, that is actually a very complex topic I purposefully do not include. So pressure recovery, again, it is more important in prosthetic valves, but not per se in the native stenosis. And you need to take that into account when you're calculating your aortic valve area with the continuity equation.
No, there is a question.
All right. So the next question is, I don't know, it's a comment or a question. Severe as in view of severe MS/MR.
I did not get that.
Yeah, I think I'll move on to the next. What is your approach to NF/LGAS? NF/LGAS, aortic stenosis.
Normal flow low gradient.
Yeah, normal.
Again, we need to look at the dobutamine stress echo, and then we need to see if the aortic stenosis gradient increases with dobutamine, and if it increases, then this patient classifies into severe AS and requires surgery.
Okay,
And again, we need to look at the CT, as I told in the talk. We need to look at the calcium scoring of the valve and see if the stenosis severity is more.
Okay, there's another question around pressure recovery, so maybe we'll give that a pass as well, as you said.
Yeah.
So there's one more question on pressure recovery. There's another question from Dr. Madhu. She's asking, in low dose DSC AVA is done by planimetry or continuity equation?
Continuity equation.
Okay. And what is the difference between anatomical aortic annulus and virtual aortic annulus?
Again, whatever we are calculating by continuity equation is actually the so-called virtual LVOT cross-sectional area. So again, the role of 3D and the CT, everything comes into play. But whatever we are calculating by continuity equation is the virtual LVOT cross-sectional area. And it's not the anatomical area.
Okay, the next question is, how do you do the calculation of LVOT diameter in a heavily calcified wall?
Again, if you're able to do it with various maneuvers with transthoracic echo itself, then it is great. You need to look at some off-axis views and see if you can look at the LVOT diameter. But then if you're not able to do, there are two options. One, you can do a TE and then calculate the LVOT diameter, or the best will be to go with CT.
Okay, how to assess severity in presence of severe MS or MR?
Yeah, severe MS and MR is a challenge whenever we are doing aortic valve area calculation. So again, you have to look at all the parameters, make sure your measurements are normal, the measurements are taken properly, and you look at the valve area if possible, do the planimetry, and then we can do a CT of the valve, and then again look at the esophageal echo. And most importantly, we go with the symptoms and then the other corroborative findings, because the flow dependent calculations are definitely going to be not with us while calculating in those patients. So you need to correlate with the clinical and the other corroborative findings, and you make use of the other modalities like TE or CT.
Sure, sir. So the next question is, with aortic regurg, how do you estimate aortic stenosis severity?
Yeah, again, because of the aortic regurgitation, your velocities and the gradients will be high. So again, you need to go with the symptoms. And if the aortic regurgitation is moderate, and if the aortic stenosis again is moderate, depending on the valve morphology, then that itself is a severe disease. So you need to again look at the symptoms, look at the other measurements like the LV dimensions, the LA dimensions, and then decide on when to send this patient for surgery. Combined disease is definitely has to be treated. You can't wait if the patient is having symptoms.
So what is the best method to calculate AS in eccentric AR?
EF. No, I did not get that question.
What is the best method to calculate aortic stenosis, I am assuming, in eccentric AR?
Again, it is a very tricky situation. If it is eccentric AR, you need to look at the severity of the AR, whether the AR is causing problems. Suppose, for example, you look at the LV dimensions, look at the various parameters of the aortic regurgitation and see if the aortic regurgitation is more than moderate. And along with that, if the aortic stenosis also is more than moderate, then again it becomes a combined disease and you need to treat the patient accordingly.
What is your experience in incidence of arrhythmia like VT with dobutamine stress test?
We need to be careful. I have not come across many patients, but it is already reported in literature. So you need to be careful and look at all your criteria properly. Don't go above 20 micrograms per kg per minute and look at the endpoints. So if you have reached any of the endpoints, you have to stop. So you should not be over enthusiastic and then go ahead with extra dose, or go ahead when the patient is already, say for example, heart rate is more than 100, or if the patient becomes symptomatic. So you need to be very careful while doing the dobutamine stress echo and follow the guidelines, which is very, very clearly given in the documents.
All right. So what is the guideline regarding surgery of asymptomatic bicuspid aortic valve with severe range gradient?
Yeah, it's very, very clear. If the velocity is more than 5 and if the gradient is more than 70, the patient directly has to go for surgery. It's a class 1 indication for surgery. You don't have to wait for the patient to develop symptoms. So it's a class 1 indication for surgery.
Sure, sir. So the next question is, how frequently we have to go for redo echo in severe aortic stenosis, and on what basis selection of mechanical and bioprosthetic valve is done for AVR?
Okay, the first question, how often do you do the echo? Again, it depends on the symptoms and the severity. Suppose, for example, we take this patient as a severe AS. So more than the mean gradient more than 40 and the velocity more than 4 and IT12 area less than 1 or index area of less than 0.6. So you go with the symptoms and see when the patient is developing symptoms. So it is very, very tricky situation. You have to ask the patient very clear-cut questions, whether the patient is having dyspnea or chest pain or any past history of pre-syncope or syncope. That patient has to go for surgery if it is one of the symptoms are positive. Suppose this patient doesn't have any symptoms, then you ideally do it once in 6 months. And then as the gradient keeps on increasing, then you do it more frequently, and then you try to convince the patient to go for surgery, because surgery is only treatment for severe aortic stenosis, and you don't wait. As I showed in my slide, the natural history of the disease. Once the patient develops angina, the patient will deteriorate and may die within 5 years. So you need to follow the symptoms. And depending on the severity of the gradient, you do it either once in 6 months or once in 3 months. Ideally, we do it once in 6 months until the patient is not symptomatic. And then if the gradient, say for example, more than 50, mean gradient more than 50, then we do it more often, once in 3 months, and then convince the patient and then get him prepared for surgery.
So the next request is to explain valvular atrial gradient in hypertension.
Pardon? I did not get that.
Sorry, can you explain valvular arterial gradient in hypertension?
This is out of this one.
Out of syllabus.
Out of syllabus. So I don't do the arterial impedance. Basically, is asking for arterial impedance, I guess. So that is a different topic. I don't practice that.
Yes, sir. It's actually for a vascular impedance question. It is
hypertension
patients with aortic stenosis.
Yeah.
Okay, so moving on. Next question is around role of first phase ejection fraction assessment and prognosis of aortic stenosis.
First phase ejection fraction
assessment in prognosis of AS.
I don't do that often. I don't see those patients, and then we don't do that actually.
Okay. What is the role of
panel members are there? I would like them to comment. If anybody is there.
If there is anybody who wishes to comment on this question, can just raise the hand or type in the chat box. We'll unmute you. Okay, till we get, okay, so I have Dr. Sachdev.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. So can we have your comment?
May I request to explain regarding the role of the LV strain in AS severity and timing of the surgery, to decide the timing of the surgery.
Yeah.
Strain rate and strain imaging.
Yeah, strain is very actually. Dr. Manish Bansal had covered this topic, so I did not include strain. Definitely, strain is definitely useful in prognosticating and follow-up of these patients, and we need to calculate the longitudinal strain and see if when we do the serial assessment and see if the strain value is coming down, and then we need to push this patient for surgery. Definitely, strain has a role in deciding the timing of surgery.
Thank you.
Sure. So moving on, at what range of ascending aorta size do you advise valve replacement plus aortic root?
4.5 centimeters, but then it can come down to 4 centimeters if, suppose, for example, there is aortopathy, there is a bicuspid aortic valve. 4 centimeters is the cutoff, but generally 4.5 centimeters. So anything more than 4.5 centimeters, you need to prepare these patients and then see if they require even aortic valve, aortic root replacement.
Okay, so there are several questions around the role of dimensionless index in aortic stenosis. Can you just comment?
I had told that dimensional index is again same as the velocity index. We just take the velocity across the VTI and the LVOT and the aortic valve, and then you calculate. If it is less than 2.25, then it indicates severe disease. So the measurement of LVOT errors in measurement of LVOT are removed. So it is a useful measurement, and then it is there in guidelines. We can use it in patients. If you are doing it regularly, I think it will be a good thing.
Sure, sir. Also, a lot of questions around GLS in terms of, has it changed the criteria? What is the role, especially for low flow LG?
It has not come in guidelines, but then there are a lot of papers, and then I did not cover this specifically because Dr. Manish Bansal had covered in his talk. Again, is he told that it is not there in the guidelines, but then if you're doing a serial assessment of patients, it is useful. But it is not there in guidelines as such till now.
So there are a lot of participants who joined in a little late. Special comment from Dr. Madhu. So ma'am, we will be retelecasting the session. Just key in your phone number and your email ID so that we include you in our mailing list and you get intimation around the same. Moving on to the next question. Again, has GLS changed the indication and timing for AVR?
No, GLS, it's still not there in guidelines, but then individually, if you're doing it regularly, it is definitely going to guide in timing of the surgery. So if the GLS is like, so for example, this patient of supposedly severe AS is coming for regular follow-ups once in 6 months or once in 3 months, you regularly do the strain imaging, and then you see if the strain is significantly coming down, then that patient is developing myocardial dysfunction, and then it needs to be sent for the surgery appropriately. Definitely it has a future, but then again it revolves around how it is done, the inter-observer, intra-observer variability, then the images which you are going to take, whether it is in the same machine, whether it's the same vendor, or whether you're doing it in different vendors. This is very complex. So then if you're doing it very systematically, I think it is definitely has a role.
Sure. So the next question is, how do we evaluate post-AVR patients? What is your recommendation?
Post-AVR is a standard protocol. We need to look at the valve morphology, whether it's a mechanical valve or a biprosthetic valve. Then you look at the gradients. Before that, you look at the leaflet. If it's a mechanical, you look at the leaflet opening, though it is very difficult to see on aortic valve. But then you can always make an attempt to look at that, and then look at the velocity and the gradient across, and then compare with the post-procedure data. And then as clinically indicated, suppose, for example, the patient is having fever, you always look at presence of vegetation, and then look at valve, whatever we are going to look at standard protocol of a prosthetic valve, look at the valve morphology, valve dehiscence, valve gradients, whether there is any obstruction. It's a standard protocol.
Sure. So how to calculate severe aortic stenosis in metallic and bioprosthetic aortic valve?
Okay, mechanical valve, again, you look at the gradient, and if it is more than your post-procedure, this one, so you need to look at whether there was a patient process mismatch, or whether there is a true valve obstruction, or whether it is because of some mechanical obstruction, whether it could be a pannus or a vegetation. So you need to look at this morphologically and then look at the gradients in a mechanical valve. If it is a bioprosthetic, again, you know, look at the valve leaflets, whether there's any thickening of the leaflets, whether there's any restriction in the opening of the leaflets, and then any presence of any obstruction to the leaflets. So it's a standard guidelines.
So do you have any recommendation on echo criteria for TAVR?
Echo criteria for TAVR, again, it is a standard guideline, which a document which is there by the American Society of Echocardiography. I would follow that one, and we need to look at the various measurements, especially the LVOT diameter, the valve area, then the valve morphology, along with the CT measurements of the ascending aorta. So these are very specific guidelines for TAVR.
Okay, so the next question is, on what basis selection of mechanical and bioprosthetic valve is done? I think you kind of touched upon.
This is basically, it revolves around the age. If the more the age, for example, if more than 70 years, if he's having significant comorbidities, then we prefer to put a bioprosthetic valve. And the younger the patient, we prefer to put a mechanical valve. This is a very, very standard guideline. Again, it depends on individual case, but these are the standard guidelines.
Sure. So the next question is, in case of a hypertensive patient with aortic stenosis, how to grade the severity, as there will be considerable valvular arterial gradient?
Yeah.
Is it like low flow, low gradient? Question mark.
No, it is not like low flow, low gradient. Suppose the patient is having a normal ejection fraction, then it is the routine evaluation. If the patient is having hypertensive heart disease, and if the ejection fraction is less, suppose we do an ejection fraction by biplane, so then it is important. But then generally, it should not cause any problems, though the LVH and then the criteria for LVH will definitely play a much role. Here, important role is, I feel it is the strain imaging plays a very important role. So if the strain values are less, then it is probably because of the aortic stenosis per se, and not because of hypertension.
All right. So the next question is, what is the role of PET scan in prosthetic valve endocarditis?
SPECT scan, yeah, definitely it is helpful, because aortic valve endocarditis sometimes may be difficult to see. So we can do a SPECT analysis to look at the activity on the valve. It is definitely having a role. Thank you for the opportunity to share my knowledge with the participants. I hope it was useful for most of them. And some questions which I couldn't cover, maybe I can look at the chat box later, and then if I have any comments, I can definitely share. And then I would like to share the regular guidelines on aortic stenosis, the valvular heart disease, and the dovitamin stress echo in valvular heart disease. The standard guidelines by the ASC. I can share that. I think it will be useful for most of the participants.
So on that note, thank you for joining us once again.